We were talking about our last wave of invasive species in the Great Lakes. So we talked about the first invasive species chronologically was what? That we talked about. What came in first? Sea lampreys. So we started with sea lampreys. They made their way through the lake. What came in next? The sea lampreys took out the top of the food chain. Next came in the alewives, which kind of did both. They kind of filled in the middle and took out some of the middle species through competition and sort of worked on the bottom. And then third was we did talk about not trout, but salmon. So the first two were accidental introductions. When we talked about salmon, that was a very intentional introduction. And that had an effect on the top of the food chain and obviously working its way down because it eats what came down. And then we started talking about this or not? I cannot remember. I'm sorry. We did not. We did. We did not. Nobody remembers.
What did we start talking about?
Did we talk about zebra mussels at all? Did anybody write down the date that they were found? 1988?
I made them.
No, 1988 was the year. 1988 was the year. Where is Montana? I think that we did not talk about them much, maybe a little bit. Maybe we mentioned that 1988. Okay, so if you look at your Great Lakes food web, if you still have it with you, by any chance, what effects did the zebra mussels have, or the quagga mussels, or both? Because they were kind of came in succession. Zebra mussels were dominant first, followed by quagga mussels next, but they're doing the same kind of thing. What is their effect on the food chain? So all of them are filter feeders. Both of them, all of them. So what level of the food chain are they going to take out first? They're going to take out the bottom. So when you look at your food chain, they're taking out the phytoplankton, the zooplankton, the very bottom, the foundation of the food chain. So they're eating a lot of they are not producers. They're eating, consuming the small producers and the small primary consumers, right? Mostly. Okay, and we talked about the year that they arrived. I'm not making the whole food chain again, the whole timeline again. 1988 was the year that the first zebra mussel was discovered. Where was it found? Who had zebra mussels?
Lake St. Clair.
Which connects what?
That connects Erie and Huron.
Yep, that's the lake between Huron and Erie. That's where the first one was found. They just dropped a net. There was a research group out there. They dropped a net and they found one. They kind of went, oh, we don't really know what this is, but it's weird, and took it back to the lab and was identified as a zebra mussel. And pretty much at that point, they knew what? This is a problem. Yeah. Because zebra mussel invasions of other bodies of water had already taken place. Where did it come from? It came from the Black Sea. I remember writing ballast water, so I think we did talk about it.
We talked about how they were like cleaning ships with ballast water.
So when we talked about the St. Lawrence Seaway opened in 1959. In 1959, that meant that travel was possible, we know that it wasn't super profitable, but it was possible for saltwater ships to come in, bringing in their ballast water. And they were not exchanging ballast water mid-trip or anything like that. And so they brought some species in the ballast water when they are trading out cargo and changing ballast water, releasing ballast water. They might have released these. What is the problem with them being in the water besides the fact that they're filter feeders? what is not in the lake to help control them. There's no predator there to eat them, so they have no natural predators. So their spread was really rapid. Because they have no natural predators in the lake. So there's nothing to eat them. And they are filter feeder, so at least in the beginning, there was plenty of stuff for them to get out of the water. So plenty to eat, no natural predators, and they reproduce rapidly. A female can produce 1 million eggs a year. So significant reproduction. By 1992. 98% of invasive mussels in the Great Lakes were zebra mussels. So within 4 years, out of all the invasive mussels found in the Great Lakes, 98% of them were zebra mussels. It was pretty quick. By 2005, that had totally shifted. So in 13 years, it went from 98% zebra mussels to 98% quagga mussels. So it was a significant, relatively quick transition. So what effects does this have on the Great Lakes? Can you think of anything that could be considered a pro? Having a massive. Pretty clean. So it greatly increased water clarity. I forgot to bring this. It gave us a number. For a Secchi disc or Secchi disc, however you like to say it. You probably don't say it, so you probably don't care. So a Secchi disc is just a disc that's white on 2/4 and black and 2/4, and you lower it in the water until you can't see it anymore, and that gives you kind of a water clarity reading. So in the 1980s in the Great Lakes, it was about 20 feet that you could lower the Secchi disc and be able to see it. By 2010, it was over 100 feet. So the water was significantly cleaner. Why is that a problem? It seems like it could be a good thing, right? Why is that a problem?
There was like less of the bottom level of the ecosystem in there.
Yeah, so if there's less of the foundation, then there's less for the next level, and less for the next level, and less for the next level. So fish populations significantly dropped. In the 1980s, the fish harvest from, I don't know if this is just Michigan or all the Great Lakes. I didn't document my sources well. The fish harvest was about 350 kilotons. In 2014, oh, this is from the survey. Must be, no, it must not be the survey. Maybe it is the survey. The fish population dropped to 5 kilotons or less. None of you were alive in the 1980s. I was, but I wasn't in the Great Lakes in the 1980s significantly, but my husband's family used to go to Pine Bay, which is in the Thousand Islands of St. Lawrence Seaway. And they loved to go fishing there. And so when we started dating, I think the first time I went was in 2001. I went in 2001, he's like, it's so fun, we'll go fishing. And we went fishing and we didn't catch a single fish, because there weren't any fish there. Like, it was, and they kept being like, the fishing used to be so great, I'm like, "Oh, this is really great, I mean, I like being on the water, I don't really care about fishing, but. They went on and on about they used to catch fish and they'd have them for breakfast and they'd have them for lunch or they'd have them for supper, and we'd fish for hours and we caught nothing. Because there were zebra mussels in the St. Lawrence River too, that have just cleaned it out. How do we control these? What are some control methods for zebra mussels that you read about? What do we get rid of?
It was eliminating the idea that they would ever get there, so like ballast water exchange at 30, that's like kind of a pre-preventative thing.
So, and in terms of prevention, yes.
I had to Google what ballast water was, like, we like never, I don't know, I just needed to Google it, I thought it feels. It's a weird thing.
So it's just water that a boat takes in to help balance its load. And so if it takes on a bunch of cargo or loses a bunch of cargo, it's gonna change its ballast level to keep it floating. They told the terrible story of the boat that like capsized in the port. That was terrifying. So ballast water exchange is one way to prevent it. So if a ship is coming over with ballast water in mid-ocean, it switches out to salt water. Theoretically, that's gonna take care of anything that might be alive in the ship. And dumping a bunch of saltwater species into the freshwater usually doesn't have an effect, except for the ones that live there.
The gobies.
So introducing a predator or the fact that the gobies made their own way there. So round gobies are also another invasive species that some of you did a poster about. The round gobies will actually eat zebra mussels and quagga mussels. The problem with introducing a predator always is that it has an effect also. And sometimes the predator becomes more of a problem than the original one was. That has not happened in this case, but. What else?
It's the water like plant, like.
So yeah, there are places that are trying chemicals. Fortunately, I don't think there's a mussel side yet. We've got the lamprey side because the lampreys, but there's nothing that is specific to zebra and quagga mussels, but using chemicals to kill them off. One of the main methods of control is actually just like physically scraping them off. So the number that I have is from the book, so it's a couple years old already, but it's been estimated that it costs over $500 million a year to manage zebra mussel and quagga mussel populations at power plants, in water systems, in industrial complexes, on boats and on docks in the Great Lakes. So $500 million a year. I don't have that much money in my back pocket. That's, again, this is tax money, state tax money and federal tax money that's being used to try to control it. And I think that's what the video is. Another way is to physically remove them or to try to smother them. So they will drain a body of water. Obviously, we can't do this with the Great Lakes, but drain a body of water down and put mats down to try to smother them, or in the winter, drain it down so that they freeze in the winter.
Where do they do this then? Do they do it
In smaller bodies of water. Because these are not just in the Great Lakes, they have traveled lots and lots and lots of places, and including out west because of this.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, because I'm from Oswego, like, so that's right out Lake Ontario, and it's such a big zebra mussel issue, and then.
Because it's overwhelming and there's nothing that can be done, unfortunately. I mean, that's the point it is at a lot of places. Sturgeon also, which are a native species, are starting to eat the mussels. So there's some native adaptations where, because there's not other food available, some of the fish populations are starting to eat them on their own because they need to be able to eat them. Because they need to eat something or die. this video just shows. This is a website that talks about, here's the thing. Some of the pros and cons, and then this is a video of them blasting zebra mussels out. Okay. My God.
Started in the eighties and nineties, invasive mussels were enveloping docks, seawalls, sunken cars, and adhering to any type of hard surface they could find. So now, it takes some old-fashioned elbow grease to keep them at bay. Today, we introduce you to one team that developed the right tools for the job.
It's freezing cold. You stay in the water for 4 or 5 hours on certain tasks. You have to deal with current. There's a lot of different things that the divers actually go through in a day, and it can be as mentally challenging as it is physically challenging for them. Your mind can really wander when you're in pitch black for hours and hours on end.
Some of the most skilled construction jobs around our region are performed in the Great Lakes, underwater by teams of commercial divers. Keith Meir is the president of Commercial Diving and Marine Services near Port Huron, Michigan. His divers are called upon to perform a variety of tasks.
They're not just a diver, they're also pipe fitters, construction workers, iron workers, carpenters, pile drivers, you name it. They're jack of all trades.
Today, they're measuring the thickness on a retaining wall to see if it needs replacing. But before they can do that, they have to clean a layer of invasive mollusks off the wall.
In order for us to do our job, a lot of times we have to remove the mussels in order to, get to what we need to work on. Whenever we're in power plants, a lot of the structures are 100% covered with an inch thick of zebra mussels. You can't even see it.
Over the years, Keith and his team developed a pretty effective method of removing the invasive mussels, what they call zebra blasting.
Carly, ready for the blaster? Yep. What it does is it just obliterates the mussels. They just turn into little tiny fragments, and then the algae and everything strips it right away.
It gets into the places that the scrubber can't get, it's 2.5 feet across, so all the little nooks and crannies, it's either that or you gotta scrape them by hand, so you can use that whenever we can. Today we're using the scrubber, to actually scrub flat walls, get you a little bit off.
Yeah, anytime you're ready on that one, Frank. I'm just following down the one like doing right now, just clearing the outside of the fluids. Diver two just sort of looking over his shoulder right now, just trying to follow what he's doing, but the visibility is pretty poor. Looking good on yours. Looks like we've got one more sheet after this one to do, that's far enough.
So, we talked about 4 different species, the ways that they've had effect. It's not just in the Great Lakes that we're seeing aquatic invasive species. It's all over the world, and we have only talked about animals, but it's also plants that are invasive. In lab, we're working with the plants that I have to substitute because I can't buy the plant that I would normally use because it's an invasive species, and they're afraid that I'm going to dump it into the Great Lakes and into the water system. And so it's plants and animals. When we talk about animals, insects, crustaceans, mollusks, fish, birds, mammals. So this is showing you coastally the number of known harmful invasive species. And so red means 31 to 56, down to no data. So there's some areas where there's no data, but you can see almost every area has at least 1 to 2, a lot. In these areas where there's a lot of shipping, coastal shipping, we're talking about 16 to 56 different kinds of invasive species that are known. So it's a global issue because we're a global
economy. Only about 16% of marine ecoregions have no reported marine invasions. So 16% means 84% do. And that figure, you know, how do we really determine that? I don't know. But why does this all matter? Why does it matter? Why do invasive species matter? So what are the costs of invasive species?
A lot of money considering that like this is muscle is $500 million. Like lots of money. right?
Money. Okay, it's physical, it's actual money for removal. It's money for prevention, like let's dump lampricide into the water. It's also has a significant effect on biodiversity of an ecosystem. But it can also affect human lives also. But the biodiversity of the ecosystem is decreased, which has an impact on the stability of the ecosystem. So as in general, as biodiversity decreases, stability decreases. When we replace something when we replace native species with non-native species, we can lose the benefits that that native species might provide. So we have naturalized honeybees. So we brought honeybees in and they pollinate plants and that is great. But there's research that shows they're not necessarily as good, they're not as effective as a native pollinator. They cannot pollinate in bad weather as much. They don't pollinate as well at lower temperatures. Whereas something that has been part of this ecosystem longer can handle cooler temperatures or more adverse weather conditions. So when we replace these native species, we lose the benefits that native species provide. And again, as we've talked about, it's going to affect the whole food web. If we take out the lake trout, that affects everything. If we take out the middle of the food chain, that affects everything. If we take out the base of the food chain, that affects everything. And we've taken out top of the food chain and the bottom of the food chain, which has changed the overall diversity of the whole Great Lakes ecosystem. So it affects the whole entire web. Which of these matters the most? As humans, we tend to focus on the first part, which is the economic cost of it. And it has significant economic costs, but some of these other ones, we don't understand the implications of necessarily, and so we can't quantify them in terms of dollars, but we know that they may have more significant effects even economically. But there's short-term and long-term costs of the invasive species. Some of them we're never going to get rid of. We're never going to get rid of lampreys totally. We're never going to get rid of zebra mussels totally. They're always going to continue to have an effect on our ecosystems. So that is kind of the end of the chapters. Chapter 4 takes us through the invasive species and the ways that we've let things in. Some people think the ultimate solution to a lot of the invasive species problem is to just close the St. Lawrence Seaway because it's not actually economically profitable anyway. And we've already forgiven all of it, that, and we're not making any money off it. And this is the kind of thing that I hope that as we're going through this semester, you can see there's not an easy answer to any of these problems. There's not like a simple, this is what we do and it fixes it kind of thing. We have complicated problems and that means there's complicated solutions and we have to weigh a lot of pros and cons. I don't know if you're like me, but like when I'm trying to make a decision about buying something, sometimes it takes me a long time to figure it out because I'm looking at this is good on this side, but this is good on that side, and which is the better decision to make. And so when we look at ways to solve these problems, what's the best way to get rid of zebra mussels? I don't know, because there's environmental costs, there's economic costs, and we're never going to fully get rid of them. So how much do we put into it economically and all emotionally and all of that. So if you learn nothing else this semester, then we don't have any answers to anything. So as we get into the next section of the book, it's also gonna be talking more, it's gonna be talking more about how what we're doing in the Great Lakes has an effect outside of the Great Lakes. So we're, I think, getting a tiny bit ahead of the book, but we're going to start talking about the idea of nutrient cycling. Okay, so we talked about the water cycle and the fact there's the same amount of water in the world. There always has been, it just changes forms. The same thing is true for different nutrients. Things like carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus and sulfur. There's the same amount of that. There always has been. It changes forms and it moves through ecosystems in different ways. It happens terrestrially and it also happens in the aquatic ecosystems. What we do on land affects the water. What happens in the water affects the land. And so we can't talk about just water ecosystem, water nutrient cycling or just land nutrient cycling. We have to talk about both of them together. So we're going to use your cards. Let's see how this works because we're missing people. I'm missing an ace, a 5, a 4, and a 6. So you're going to be given a cycle based on that, and I said ones are aces. Sorry, I do know that incorrect. I just so if you have an ace or a 5, you are carbon. If you have a 2 or a 6, you're nitrogen. If you have 3 or 4, you're phosphorus. And if you have, 3 or 7, you're phosphorus. If you have 4 or an 8, you're sulfur. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to meet with your expert group. So you are going to be the expert in that area, whether it's carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, or sulfur. I have examples of the cycles from one of my textbooks up here. If you don't want to use this one in the end, that's fine. But you're going to meet in your expert group and make yourself familiar with that cycle. Familiar enough that you're going to then split up. Some of you are probably educated people that you've done it yourself. Okay, you're going to split up and you're going to be in a group with carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur. And you're going to be the one that talks about carbon, and the other person's going to talk about phosphorus, the other person's going to talk about sulfur, and the other person's going to talk about nitrogen. So we're going to spend time in your expert group first. And you could take one of these diagrams and you're going to think about how does this element move and change forms through both land and water? How is water involved in this process? What living organisms are involved? About how long does this take? And how are humans involved or changing this process? So we're going to worry about that first. So I know that I'm going to be missing, although aces are going to go together. So there should be 3 aces. So why don't you aces come take a carbon and go find a space. Then I should have 4 twos. You can come take a nitrogen. I should have 4 threes. I will only have 3 4s, 3 5s. Oh, I'm only gonna have 2 8s because I already took out an 8. 3 6s, and there may only be 2 8s. I'm gonna have to fill in the sulfur. I already knew that one. So. Take your card with you to find your people.